Hey kids, this story starts with Joseph in prison, but ends with him the chief leader in the country. It came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. And suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, and they were ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking fat cows, so Pharaoh awoke. Then he slept again, and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and the wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember when Pharaoh was angry and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker, and we each had a dream in one night. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us, and it came to pass just as he interpreted it, so it happened. So Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon, and he shaved and changed his clothing and came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream and interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river, and suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, looking fine and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the gaunt and the ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke. Also I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, full and good. Then behold, 7 heads, withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them, and the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. And let him appoint officers over the land, to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep the food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, that the land may not perish during the famine. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, in the eyes of all his servants? And Pharaoh said to the servants, Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, Bow the knee. So he had set him over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old, and Pharaoh gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Pharoah, priest of On. Now in the 7 plentiful years the ground brought forth abundantly. So Joseph gathered up and laid up the food in the cities, from the fields which surrounded them, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, and Joseph called them Manasseh and Ephraim. Then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said. The famine was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, do it. So the famine was over all the face of the earth. And Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. So all the countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all lands. Well, kids, it's clear how God was looking after Joseph and prepared him for a special time and a place in the history of the nation of Israel.